was Peppy that said, you're right in the thick of, the perimenopause from what you've said. And then they were kind of at that point saying, right, okay, you can just go back. This is what you need. This is what you go back, and this is what you ask for. And honestly, I feel like you guys saved my life, because at this point, it was so difficult for me.
Hi everyone, it's Kathy here. World Menopause Month this month, and we are continuing our focus on menopause in the workplace. Last week I spoke to Lauren Lunnis from BNP Paribas about their journey to launch workplace menopause support. And this week I'm delighted to have with me Natalie, an employee at Pangea Global Associates and Peppy Menopause user, who will be sharing her lived experience of menopause with me and how it's affected her at work. Natalie, perhaps we could start by you just giving a quick introduction to yourself and your background.
Mm-hmm. So I have a company called Pangea Global Associates. I specialise in working with software vendors and consulting firms all over the world in finding their senior people. And I've been doing that for about 14 years. Prior to that, I was actually in software sales, so I didn't come from a recruitment background. And then in the last few years, I've been on quite the journey with well-being, funnily enough, and you'll find out why, but with breath work and with cacao, ceremonial cacao, and then more recently, really looking at the mind and beliefs and stepping out of those beliefs to come back to our true essence, which is oneness and love.
I'm looking forward to hearing that, thank you. We're mixing things up a bit from normal this time because I want to go straight in with you, Natalie, and listen to your personal story around menopause at work. I appreciate you being with us today. I really appreciate you being open and willing to talk to us about what can sometimes be quite a personal experience. So, Natalie, take me through your journey with the menopause, and particularly on how it did impact you in work.
Yeah, okay, so I would say that I started to experience symptoms around 2017. The reason I know that is because I've worked for myself for many, many years, and I've worked from home. My daughter was getting a bit older, and I thought, do you know what? I'm apparently quite an extrovert person, and I just decided that maybe it'd do me a lot of good to get into a shared office, be around people. Maybe there was stuff already happening around some shifts anyway that inspired me to do that. So I decided to start working in a shared office in Manchester. And around this time, I started to experience what I would class as like brain zaps. So, for example, one of the days I went to the Trafford Centre, and it was almost like 1 minute I'm in the Trafford Centre, and the next minute I've been plonked from outer space. I don't know where my car is, and it was all really confusing. And I think it probably lasted about 10-15 seconds. But I remember it feeling like sheer panic. I've had panic attacks, it wasn't a panic attack. I've had panic attacks many years ago, it wasn't that. So it was a kind of like, oh, that's strange. And then as I started to work in this office where I had lots of people around me, I found that I started to become very, very sensitive to noise. I became very shy, not shy, but self-conscious. So all of those skills that I'd always had around being able to make conversation and really relate to people, I just found that I was really withdrawing and doubting myself, so kind of losing confidence, I would say. And I think that was exacerbated by the fact that I was really struggling to find words in conversation. So I might be, someone might ask me a question, I'd start responding to the question, and then, what would usually be one word, to be quite articulate, couldn't find the word, and, the next thing I've got like 5 or 6 words where there really should have been one. And just starting to feel quite embarrassed and like that, and that I didn't fit in. I just didn't feel like I fit in. I also, like around that time, had what I would class as a spiritual experience. So everything that was happening because I hadn't had any shifts in things physically, so my periods were normal, wasn't getting anything else. I started putting it down to that. So I was like, okay, maybe something strange is happening to me. So it was all really frightening because it was completely different to anything that I'd experienced before. So at that point, I think I probably worked there for about a year, but I only was literally going in about 1 day a week, maybe even twice a month, because I couldn't face it. And then I think it was about 2020, came out of a relationship and I came off the pill. And it was then that I realised that actually the periods started to change. So I feel like maybe the being on the pill was hiding what was really going on. And I think that was when I kind of contacted you guys after I didn't have a period for about 5 months. And at that point it all became quite clear that there was a decline. I'd really stopped meeting with people for coffees. I'd started to feel like everything had changed in my life, that I was feeling quite hopeless. So everything that was happening to me was cognitive. You know, when we were in the lockdowns, obviously everything went to Zoom. Every time I had to have a Zoom with a candidate or with a client, I felt like I wanted to run out of the room. The social anxiety was so strong. And for me, it definitely wasn't because I'd been locked down. It was just a feeling of I can't, mainly because I couldn't string a sentence together. I started speaking to Peppy. I had a hormone check actually, because my mum said at this point I didn't have a period for about 5 months, and my mum said, you really need to get your hormones checked, which I did, and they came back normal. So I was like, well, don't really understand how that can be if I've missed a period for 5 months. And again, it was Peppy that said, no, you need to ring up, check. I can't remember the actual hormone that I was asked to check. But when I actually asked, the doctor said, well, whoever it was, receptionist, whatever, was like, well, yeah, that is actually low. And Peppy again then said, yeah, you're right in the thick of, you know, the perimenopause from what you've said. And then they were kind of at that point saying, right, okay, you can just go back. This is what you need. This is what you go back, and this is what you ask for. And honestly, I feel like you guys saved my life, because at this point it was so difficult for me because I couldn't understand what was going on. I didn't think there was any help, and I fully didn't understand. So that was the journey. How hard it was work-wise was, luckily for me, because I worked for myself, I did have an opportunity to go and have a nap. I did have an opportunity to start taking time out. I can't imagine what that would have been like for my experience, trying to be in a work environment when things get that overwhelming and your cognitive function feels like it's completely gone. So that was the start of it, really.
Thank you. There's a couple of things there that I reflect on, really. One is the fact that blood tests can be so misleading. And as you've sort of highlighted, really, you need to listen to your body, and you'd gone without periods, you had symptoms. That told you, really, that your body was going through those changes. For you, it was nice to have the affirmation of the blood test eventually, but in fact, your body was telling you that you were going through these changes. And I just wonder as well, Natalie, from what you've described, it sounds to me as if you weren't very ready for menopause, and I just wonder whether you'd had any preparation or were even expecting it to be hitting you at that time.
Well, that was it. So that was why there was absolutely nothing in my mind that was looking at that. Because, 41 years old, 42, my idea of what menopause was at that time was, when I'm about 54, maybe even, around that age, then my periods will stop and I will go through something called menopause, which is apparently quite difficult, and I'll probably have some hot sweats. None of the stuff that I had was what I was, what I expected, and then to be having it so early, it just didn't even cross my mind. So yeah, it was quite a shock when, even though things started pointing to, well, something's definitely off. It was easier for me to say, okay, something's shifting in me because I'm transforming on a spiritual level, yeah, than when it came to the fact, oh, you're in perimenopause. That was devastating because of the ideas and stigma that was around that. Because for me, it was like, well, oh, that's it now. That's it. Your life's over. Like, you finish. I mean, we'll come on to the spiritual side of things, because actually I do think it is a spiritual awakening. I see that now. But at the time, the two things just didn't correlate, and all I knew was, I'm now finished. That's it, I'm finished.
We do have...
It was really rough.
We do have some very negative connotations.
Not the truth, guys, don't worry.
No, thank you for affirming that.
But luckily things are changing. Yeah, I think luckily things are changing, and I feel so differently about it now. It's unbelievable. So I can't wait to talk about the positive side. But actually, it was the narrative around it and the not understanding that was causing a lot of the suffering. It wasn't really what was going on, it was the not understanding what was going on and the negative connotations around that for me that made it and exacerbated that whole story.
Yes, I think you've highlighted there, Natalie, that nobody prepares us for menopause. You were fortunate because you were able to talk to your mum, actually. A lot of us, our mums don't remember, or I think there's some kind of blanking out, like there is when you've had a baby. You opt out of remembering what it was like. So very often we don't know what to expect when we get through to the menopause, and particularly if, like you, it happens a bit earlier than the average of 45 to 55. If you're a little bit younger, it takes you by surprise. And the other thing that you mentioned, Natalie, as well, was that you didn't have classic menopause symptoms. So the physical ones, things like flushings, or maybe you did as well, but the ones that bothered you the most was the brain fog, the concentration, the fuzziness, the lack of clarity of thought. And it's interesting that when we look at surveys, it is that which working people in particular often say are the most bothersome. That's really interesting. So when you got to Peppy, which I'm really pleased to hear was good for you, were they able to talk to you about treatment options? Did you choose any treatment options?
Yeah, it was amazing. So I mean, just to clarify, with my mum, that literally came at the point when I was like, I haven't had a period for 5 months. I didn't really discuss the rest of it because there was absolutely, I kind of kept it to myself because I actually thought maybe I was losing the plot and I didn't really want anyone to know. So the hiding of it as well and not being completely honest about it was, again, making it a bigger issue for me, and to keep it kind of secret, I guess, because I was trying to deal with it on my own. So as soon as I spoke to Peppy, and Peppy was saying, yeah, like from what you've said, you're right in it, and you can just go on HRT straight away. You can use the gel, and honestly, there was absolutely nothing in me. That's not quite true. Initially, the idea of going on HRT at, what was I, 44 maybe, so I've been on it 2 years, so yeah, 45. There was a little bit of resistance because then it made it really real, and I definitely now was an old woman in my mind. I was like, oh, but in the same vein, it was a little bit like what happened to me when I struggled with breastfeeding, and then eventually when I stopped breastfeeding, I was like, oh yes, thank the Lord, it's fine. So when I actually did say, okay, I'll give the HRT a try, I kid you not, within 1 day of putting the estrogen on, I was a totally different person as far as where I was in my mind. It literally lifted that quickly. When the progesterone was introduced, that was a little bit of a different story for a couple of months. That got a bit tricky again. But I stuck with it because the estrogen was just so helpful I just felt like I was coming back, like that part of me that could actually function was coming back. Because it's all well and good for me, I feel like the perimenopause and the menopause, it is a stage in your life where you are actually being shown to slow down. These things are coming up into your awareness because it is natural evolution, and it is showing you maybe the things that aren't aligned with you anymore, or maybe, it's not, maybe the job that you do isn't actually the job for you anymore. Maybe the relationship isn't, maybe these things are coming up into your awareness to say, actually, you've been living a little bit of a lie, so we're going to make it really difficult for you so that you can look at these things. It's not the same for everybody, but for me, definitely was there to show me you're not really living your best life. So unless this comes up into your awareness, you're going to keep doing these things that are not actually showing you your true happiness and your true self. So that's kind of what happened for me. It just really showed me those things. But because of the narrative in the Western world, like I know the Japanese call it the second spring, and it's beautiful, but obviously here it's like, oh my God, it's menopause and I'm finished and I'm old. And that narrative is what makes us think that it shouldn't be happening. Makes us think that it shouldn't be happening, and of course it should be happening. It's completely natural. So the only thing that needs to change really is the narrative and the understanding and the education, and as well women coming together to support each other. And yeah, there are things out there that can make the journey a little bit easier, so that you can settle into it. It doesn't have to be really difficult. And I guess for a lot of people, not everybody has the same symptoms. Some people really struggle with sleep. Some people really struggle with the sweats. And, I know people that struggle with those things as well.
Yes, the in menopause experience is unique to every individual, isn't it? Everybody experiences it differently. I think you're right about the narrative. We have a lot of the language we use around menopause is about loss and decay and failure and declining. Yes. And actually there are a lot more positive things around it, which we'll come on to later. But, I'd love to keep talking about your story, Natalie, but we need to just move on a little bit. And I want to move into our section where we start myth busting. So I want to move into where we're myth busting, address some misconceptions, both that you've encountered, but also just the ones that you hear around you in general. So I guess, first of all, this is one which is really relevant, is what would you say to people that say only middle-aged women experience menopause?
Well, it's not true. I do know people who have had to go through it a lot earlier. Maybe they've had to have a hysterectomy, or, it can happen at any point, I guess. And I've got friends who have really struggled. They've gone into it earlier, and because the narrative around it is, well, you're probably too young for that. It's almost like we're not being trusted in knowing our bodies. We're not being trusted in knowing our symptoms and how it's affecting us. And there has to be an element of each individual person is having a different experience. And you can't just look at the hormones and say, oh, it's just that. Because I'm guessing there's a lot of women out there who really have struggled to be listened to. I've definitely got friends who've been refused HRT who have really struggled. So yeah, it's not the truth. It can happen at any point.
Yeah, it's interesting that we always think of it as being average age 50, but a perfect illustration of almost 5 to 10 years before that. And we know that 1 in 100 do go through menopause under 40, 1 in 1,000 under 30. So, this stereotype of it being a 50-year-old woman is quite wrong, actually.
I think where it gets tricky, or the reason why that is because people think that menopause is when you don't have a period for a year and then the symptoms start. Whereas they're not realising that actually it's the 10 years before where it does. That's when they really kick in, the symptoms. But that's massively changed now, I think. People are much, much more aware. But yeah, that was it for me. I just had absolutely no clue.
Yes, I think the term perimenopause is understood much better now than it used to be, which is the time before your periods stop and then for the first 12 months or so afterwards. Yeah. And as you say, symptoms often do arise before you see any change in your periods at all. You can get that indicator. I'm going to move on to our next myth, if you like, and that's the one that menopause is private and we shouldn't be talking about it at work. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so for me, I'm not in a office where I'm not around lots of colleagues. I have been in that environment. But again, it's that kind of, for me, I knew that I had a story to share that would have been helpful. But for quite a while, I chose not to do that because of the perception of not wanting to be in that bracket. I think, if you look at the way age is perceived in society and how many women are really trying to avoid looking older, you start telling people that you're on HRT, it's probably, a little bit in line with, oh no, my forehead's got wrinkles, it's that same kind of thing. So it's all the same thing. There's just this massive problem in our society with age in women.
It's interesting, isn't it? We don't see that same conversation around men all the time, although they have their own health issues as well, of course. Workplaces, is there a place for the workplace to be talking about it? What about managers and colleagues at work? How would you advise workplaces? What should they be doing?
Yeah, I think I think there has to be an element of flexibility depending on where women are, because there's good days and bad days. For me, there were definitely days where I literally could not put things together. And if that's happening and there's overwhelm, you can only do what you're capable of. And if you don't have the capacity to do it, then it's almost like, okay, we need managers and we need an environment where it's safe to say, I haven't got this today, but if you could just give me a break and take the pressure off, I'll probably get it all done on another day. But it's making people aware that can be somebody's experience, but also recognising that you're going to get some people who are like, they're just using it, or we're definitely we can definitely be quite limited at this point in life, and there has to be real compassion and understanding. And what I would say is, if you don't have that, maybe it's time to move on.
And it's about, I guess, education as well, because if we as women don't even understand what to expect, then how can we expect those who are never going to go through menopause to have explored that? So we're going to get better education as well. Yeah.
I see it more and more now that there do seem to be menopause coaches and stuff coming into work. So that, if you can start early and educating people just on what it is and how it affects people, you'll get younger women understanding it more as well, in their 20s and 30s.
I think you're right. So I think that's important. I'm going to move on to our next round, which is what we call our rapid quickfire round. So short answers here, if you don't mind, Natalie. But briefly, if I had to ask you to put your menopause experience into 3 words, what would you say?
Challenging, educating, and awakening.
Okay, I wish we had lots more time to explore some of that. I am going to put you on the spot though and ask if there were any positives.
Yeah, absolutely, massive. It's been such a transformational journey for me. The stuff that has arrived because of it, the stuff that arrived because I didn't know what it was. So trying to find ways to feel better, breath work, cacao, plant medicines, amazing. We're really, really good for that and very supportive. Now doing workshops with other people around this, and also being very heavily involved this last year in retreats, in supporting people with beliefs, because I think we all have our own beliefs which are potentially making the journey more difficult, but as a collective we have a huge belief. So if we can undo the collective belief, then less women are going to find this a difficult journey. And see it as, the way I look at it is it literally is the caterpillar in the cocoon, and the transformational journey. And for me, I've never been happier than I have been this last year. It's taken work, it's taken a lot of undoing of my beliefs in general. It's really taken me to look at my life in what makes me happy and what doesn't make me happy. But if I wasn't really uncomfortable through this, I wouldn't have done all that and I wouldn't be where I am now.
Thank you. And is there a piece of advice that maybe you've been given or that you've heard others saying that actually you think is quite unhelpful?
I think just my own advice that I was giving myself, which was that this was just hopeless and it was over. That's it. Now that you've had your fun, and that's it. And it's just absolute nonsense. But luckily, like you say, this kind of work, just helping women, challenging them. It's absolutely not what you think it is, and just start challenging your beliefs. And listen to as much as possible. It really can be a very positive experience. It's all about how we reframe things and challenge our beliefs.
Thank you. And you mentioned about younger colleagues needing to learn and understand about menopause, but what about our male colleagues? How important do you think it is that they understand, and do you think they can understand what it's like?
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought that for men, there'll be a lot of them experiencing quite challenging things in their relationships because of what their wives or partners are going through. And I can imagine it can be very challenging for them, especially if, the rage is coming up for their partner who just seems to be having like a massive outburst over the bins not being put out or whatever. But actually, a lot of that stuff is already there. It just feels bigger. So I think there's huge help in men being educated about what's going on and maybe how to support. Obviously, a lot of men are trying to fix a situation, and that could be the worst thing to try and do in this scenario. So yeah, education around what it is, how it's affecting, what it's doing to the brain, what it is doing to the brain, and how it's affecting emotions, and that education has got to be helpful for these relationships. It has to not be used against women. We've had it, I'm not sure whether you'd get away with it now, but we've had it before where, when I was in corporate in my younger years, you'd get the odd comment of, oh, time of the month, is it? It absolutely cannot be used. But I guess it'd be difficult for that to happen now, because I think there'd be things to be said internally in HR if that was the case. Yeah.
I find it fascinating that almost everyone that I talk to about relationships, they always use the bins, putting the bins out as that analogy as to how good the relationship is.
Oh, do they?
Whether you can do that without arguing.
I think that's just one. I think that's the one across the board.
I think it is. I think you're right. Natalie, I want to move into a picture, really, a situation, and imagine that you're guiding somebody, a friend, somebody that you know, through a tough day at work. They've got menopausal symptoms, whether it's physical ones or psychological ones, and they're seeking your advice. So how would you advise them to seek support at work? Love to know your ideas.
Yeah, I think to just start to create some space to maybe come out of the environment and to be able to say, look, I'm just going to have to take some time out for a minute. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm, not feeling great. If you have a colleague or somebody that understands what you're going with, perhaps they could go with you. Learning some breathing techniques. The 4-6-7 breath is really good. Breathe in for 4, hold it for 6, out for 7 through pursed lips is very, very good. If you can learn EFT tapping, that's also really good for moving emotion through the meridians. Amazingly good, actually. And in those moments, just knowing that you can actually change your experience through just being, maybe just coming out of the environment. And sometimes just asking to go home.
I think that's really good tips. What about talking to a manager? How would you broach that conversation? Because it's quite difficult. It depends how you think you're going to be received, of course. But to just go up and say, by the way, I'm menopausal, is not always easy, is it?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I say, I didn't have this issue because I wasn't in that environment. But I think if there is somebody in place within the business who is kind of putting it out there regularly on emails, just letting you know, I'm the one trained in menopause or perimenopause, and if you're having symptoms, you can come and talk to me at any time. My door is always open. I think anything like that has got to be really, really helpful. It's knowing that it's not got to be hidden. It's not got to be embarrassed about, there is a shared understanding in that corporate environment. That's going to be massively helpful. And like I say, if it's not in there, then you might want to think about moving on. Because this is really important. It's really, really important. It's a big. It can be. I mean, some people just go, "Oh, I went through menopause overnight and I didn't even know I'd gone through it." Good for you. But some people really find it extremely overwhelming. So to know that your employer cares and you've got somewhere to go is hugely helpful. And that's how you're going to keep your employees. Otherwise, you will lose. Depending on how big the organisation is, I don't know what the statistics are of, women at any point going through menopause or perimenopause within a corporate environment. But if you want to keep them, look after them. Otherwise, they'll either be off sick a lot or they'll just go.
Yes, I mean, I can help you with some of those statistics. 1 in 4 women at work say that they seriously consider giving up work because of their symptoms. And the surveys show that around 1 in 10 actually do from big organisations. So it is a really important issue. And the other role that you described there, although you didn't use the word, but within an organisation, having menopause champions is really useful, isn't it? Because that's often the person that you can go to. Yeah. Natalie, thank you so much for sharing your story, and it's been really interesting to listen how you've come through from, first of all, just not even realising that you were into the early menopause to getting support and then being able to get some treatment, but also much more broadly evaluating your life and coming through much more positive. And some of the words that you've used, challenging, educational, awakening, but also you've used some really positive words, things like transformational, positive beliefs, and how the narrative needs to change around the menopause and the conversation. I think that's really good. We've also busted some myths, and you've helped us to dispel some of those preconceived ideas that we have about menopause and the importance of talking about it openly, being honest with ourselves, with our loved ones, but also with our work colleagues, and the importance of people in the workplace being educated, being supportive, maybe having menopause champions as well. And you finished really by just highlighting how important a topic this is and how women can be very markedly affected. So I really would like to say thank you. I'm going to give you 30 seconds if there's something else that you feel that you've forgotten to say.
No, not really. I mean, the awakening side of things has been the most positive thing for me when I say awakening. Really kind of just looking at life, looking at how I was coasting along and the shake-up that happened so that I actually could be in the most joyful place I've ever been. So, don't lose faith, ladies. We're good. You've got this.
Natalie, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for listening and joining me today on Pep Talks, Health Matters at Work. If, like me, you love talking about all things health and work related, hit the subscribe button, leave a review, spread the word. Your feedback drives our content. And if there's something you'd like me to talk about or somebody you'd like to talk to, then please let us know. Thank you. And Natalie, thank you again.
Thank you.
Tune in next week as we continue our conversations around menopause in the workplace.